And the first of our instrument makers that we're going to meet is Philippe Bolton. And Philippe, are you there to say hello? You're joining us from Provence, your lovely little town in the south of France. And you have a video to show us of your workshop, that's right. But also you're here to answer questions and talk a little bit about what you do as well. Is that about right?
That's fine.
Yeah, that's great.
So we start with the video?
Yes, let's do that. And then everyone can see what it is that you get up to.
Hello, my name is Philippe. I am a recorder maker and I work in a small village in Provence. This is the entrance to my workshop. I am now going to invite you in. We will first take a look at the workshop itself. Here is the lathe. This is the most important machine in the workshop. Now we are looking at the drill press. Next, a milling machine. In front of the milling machine, a small metalworking lathe. And here we have the windway cutter. On our way round, we are now going to see some of the small tools I use for voicing and tuning recorders. And now we can see my workbench where all the important things happen. Back to the lathe now. This machine is just used for making pieces of wood rotate so that I can work on them with tools while they are turning. On the left we have the headstock of the machine, on the right the tailstock. The machine works, of course the motor is connected to the headstock. This is what makes pieces of wood turn. When I am starting recorders, I use this driving center to turn the wood. When the pieces of wood have been bored, then I use this center. It is made of wood and it holds the wood by its bore. When I do boring, then I have to have access to the end of the piece of wood and I fit it in a chuck like this one. Here on the other end of the lathe is the rotating center which serves as a support for the pieces of wood. I can remove this center and put a chuck in the tailstock instead. This chuck can be used for holding drills for boring instruments. And here you can see the lever with which I push the drills into the wood. Now you can see the lathe set up for boring an instrument. Here are the spoon drills that I use for boring. These are very traditional. There's a drawing of one of them in Diderot's encyclopedia. These are the shorter ones I use. And now we will look at the longer ones. The principle is always the same. If pieces of wood are too big to fit in the chuck, then I use this steady as a support, giving me access to the end. This is my sharpener, a Tormek sharpener with a slow moving wet grindstone. This is the drill press, mainly used for boring the instrument's holes, but can be used for other things. Now the bandsaw for cutting wood. I use this quite a lot, but I sometimes cut pieces of wood by hand using these Japanese saws. And when it comes to cutting big logs of boxwood, then I use a chainsaw. This is a small metal working lathe used for making the reamers with which I will work on the bores. And the reamers are finished on this milling machine. So time has come to start work. Here I am in my attic where I season some of my wood. I'm now selecting a nice log of boxwood. My next task will be to split it in two. Now I can fix these half logs on the lathe using the driving center I showed you. During this roughing down process, this irregular shaped piece of wood will become round. There's quite a lot of vibration to begin with, but it gets smoother and smoother as we go along. The lathe is sturdy enough to support this vibration. When the piece of wood is better balanced, then I can increase the speed. It'll go more quickly. I end up with a nice round piece of wood, which will now be put aside to check its stability. Now I'm selecting a piece of wood that has been resting. And now we can start boring it. So I fix the chuck on the lathe and first make a pilot hole. After which I can bore right through the piece of wood. These spoon drills leave a cylindrical hole in the wood. Conical pieces step bored with drills of different diameters. The bore then has to be worked on with these reamers to give it its exact profile and dimensions. These reamers are made by the maker himself usually, and here you can see me starting to ream this piece of wood which has been bored. The reamer will leave its shape where it stops, and on the tool you'll see a small mark to show me where to stop when it is in line with the top of the piece of wood being worked on. This can be done on the lathe. Nowadays I usually do it on the lathe more often than by hand, as you can see here. The result is the same. When done on the lathe, it looks just like a boring operation. When the bore has been finished, then I can turn the outside. This is done by holding the piece of wood on the machine by its bore using the wooden center I showed you. And of course it is perfectly concentric. Here you can see the windway cutter. This is an important job, cutting a groove, but a very precise groove above the bore, and this groove will become the windway. I'm very often taking this piece of wood off to measure it. The degree of precision is about 1/10 of a millimeter, sometimes less, so I have to be very precise. Now you can see me cutting the labium or lip using a sharp chisel and some small knives. It's less impressive than it looks. Now I'm cutting the edge back to the right distance from the windway. Now you can see me making the block, which is made from a softer wood than the instrument itself, so as not to split it if it swells with moisture. And this is just a little system I have for making it nice and round. Here I'm working on the top of the block, which is of course the important part, which requires great precision. Now you can see me fitting the block in an instrument. It has to be airtight. When the block is in, then I can cut the beak. Here you can see me using a small saw to do this, and even though it looks impressive, there's no danger for my finger. I just want to stop it from ripping. And the beak is finished using chisels, files, etc. And now I'm starting to voice the instrument, listening to the sound. But voicing and tuning are a little interconnected. So here you can see me marking out the hole positions for the instrument. This has to be precise, otherwise the tuning won't be correct. And here the holes are being bored, exactly where I have marked them. And they're all bored too small to allow for tuning. These are the small tools that I use for voicing the instrument. Most of them are either homemade or home adapted. And here you can see just a little bit of voicing. It is a long and intricate process. Here I'm cutting the block chamfer. Now working on the top of the block, which has to be about 1/10 of a millimeter below the edge, and now I'm working in the windway. This is the top chamfer, and of course what is important is the sound of the instrument. And these are the tools I use for measuring the voicing. As I said, the voicing has to be very precise. And here you can hear me checking the sound of certain notes. These are the tools used for tuning. You can see a small knife, some hole reamers, and a little rotary tool, and of course the electronic tuner. Tuning is done by opening the holes progressively, one after the other, and undercutting them. You can see the angle of the tool used for undercutting. This is important for the sound. It improves the sound when holes are undercut. And I'm of course checking the tuning all the time. The medieval recorders I make are inspired from paintings. There are so few originals. This painting goes back to the 15th century and is now in a museum in Munich. You can see the top part of the instruments very well, but not the bottom part. So here is another painting from about the same period that shows the lower part of the recorder. I combine these, in fact, for the instruments that I make. Here is a set of medieval recorders. I wouldn't talk about consorts here. They're not consort instruments, but the smallest one is a sopranino and the biggest one is a tenor. This painting is on the ceiling of a chapel in Le Mans Cathedral, showing an angel playing a double recorder, which is an instrument that's quite interesting for me. This painting from the Avignon School shows also something similar. On the bottom left, an angel playing a double recorder. Here's a 15th century Italian painting showing somebody playing probably two recorders, not one double recorder. And here is a sculpture in France, in Bourges, in the Palais Jacques Coeur, showing something similar. And now you can see the double recorder that I have made from this. It's perhaps not very authentic, but it has a lovely sound. My last project, or my latest project, is this little instrument on a capital in Cerisy-la-Forêt Abbey Church. It's not a very easy project because the sculpture is not very precise and the instrument is curved to fit the capital. But here is the instrument I am in the process of making. And that's it. Thank you for visiting my workshop. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I'll see some of you again soon.
Thank you so much for doing that, Philippe. That was absolutely fascinating. And I have to say one thing that maybe doesn't come across fully in the video, but we were fortunate enough to visit Philippe's workshop a few years ago, and it's tiny. It's really small, isn't it, Philippe? I mean, you can witness to that. Yeah.
Yes. Some people say it looks like Geppetto's workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So going around with the video, you get a full sense of the scale of the thing, but it's just small and perfectly formed.
And very full up.
And very, very full up, yeah. People have just, generally, I tell you, Philippe, people found that very relaxing and absorbing. People just going, oh, this is fascinating. This is just so relaxing. Edward said, instrument makers are the hidden heroes of the musical world. So that's nice for you. But there are a few questions. So, Lucille, you had a question. Do you want to unmute and ask away?
Hello. Yes, I was wondering about the tuning. If it is too sharp, do you make the hole bigger? Or if the other way around, if it's too flat?
It's the other way around. A bigger hole will make a sharper note. So, well, you have to be careful. But it is possible to lower a note by putting a little wax in a hole. But things are just a little more complicated because there are only 8 holes and certain recorders are capable of playing 30 notes, which means that one hole is going to be used for up to 4 notes, 4 different notes. So that there is a balance to be found between the position of the hole, its diameter, and the profile of the bore underneath the hole or elsewhere in the instrument. So it is a fairly complex thing.
Natalie, you were asking something. Do you want to ask up, Natalie?
I certainly can. I was interested in the wood staining. Was it a customer choice or is that something that you decide? And how long does the process actually take?
It doesn't take very long. It's very often a customer choice. When I make an instrument, I suggest copying the original. So if the original is stained, then I suggest staining it, but some people prefer unstained instrument, that it has no effect on the sound at all.
Okay.
Traditionally, especially hardwoods like boxwood, are stained using nitric acid, which is not a real stain. In fact, it burns the wood. rather than
Right.
colouring it. And this is done, well, you have to be a little careful because it's you can burn yourself with it, and it's not very good for the lungs either. So if you can do that outside, it's better than inside. The process itself is fairly quick, but of course the stain has to settle down afterwards. The nitric acid has to be neutralized in some way or another, and this does take a little more time. We could say that, well, we can allow a day for that.
Right, thank you.
Other stains, water-based or alcohol-based stains, can be used, but they're not on hardwoods. They don't. They're not very permanent. They tend to be rubbed away.
How long does it take to make a recorder, one of your medieval recorders,
Well,
from start to finish?
From start to finish, it's quite long. I'd say several weeks, perhaps more. But in fact, if I put end to end the operations for one single instrument, it would be about 10 days' work.
Right.
But then there are rest periods, as I've sort of very quickly said, but perhaps it didn't sort of come. When the wood has been worked, especially boxwood, it can be unstable. It can twitch a bit. And I have to let these movements take place before continuing. So between different stages, there is a rest period. And some woods, especially the woods I use for medieval instruments, are more stable. Pear wood, for example, is a wood that moves a lot during seasoning, but once it's seasoned, it's very stable, which is why it was used before plastic for making rulers and things like that, because they would remain straight.
You've made a lot of your tools yourself as well, haven't you? Are they all ancient styles of tools, or have you developed new tools, as far as you know?
I have developed my own tools. There's very little historical evidence of what tools makers made in the past, what makers used in the past. But I think each maker invents the tools he needs for the particular jobs he has to do. Reamers are very classical. You can't make wind instruments without reaming them in some way or another. And of course, these are things that have been passed on from one generation of makers to the next. And of course, as things evolve, I could imagine, I don't do this, but I could imagine using a computer controlled lathe for this, but I don't. I do this on a classical lathe. But technical progress never stops.
Yeah.
We just use the tools we need, and if suddenly I feel that I need something else, then I'll try and make the tool necessary for it.
I suppose the big difference between making your instruments nowadays, your medieval instruments nowadays, and making them a recorder in the 15th century, for example, will be technological improvements that allow to do the process more quickly, more exactly, perhaps. Would it just have taken longer to do in the past without the electrical lathes and so on?
But lathes existed at the time.
But not with electricity.
There were various, but I don't think that changed. That would have changed very much. There were various ways of making a lathe turn, either using water power, for example. Steam power didn't exist. You could also have an apprentice in the workshop just turning the thing. Poor man.
Are you after an apprentice, Philippe? It reminds me of seeing pictures of organ players, and they've always got the poor bellows man in the background bumping away. Yeah, absolutely. So Andrea, are you there, Andrea? Would you like to ask your question? That looks a very interesting recorder question there.
Yes, I'm here. Bonjour, Philippe.
Bonjour.
So I've been looking at your website, and I've recently gone back to the recorder after many years away from it, and I'm particularly interested in altos in G, and I see that you make various different ones, and I was just wondering if you might be able to describe what you think is the difference in sound between, for example, a medieval, a Ganassi, and a Haka alto in G?
Well, I think the difference in sound comes principally from the bore shape. The Haka alto that you mentioned has a slightly tapered bore and is made in boxwood. The medieval instruments I make have completely cylindrical bores, and this does give a different sound spectrum. And perhaps a choice of wood also. I usually use fairly softer woods for medieval instruments than what I use for later, say, instruments from the 17th century onwards. And of course, the Ganassi instrument is something a little special. It's not a historical instrument at all. It's a modern invention with a cylindrical bore and a flare at the end of the bore. And this particular bore profile does give a sound with a honking first note and a fairly subdued second note, and then it gets more balanced. But a really cylindrical bore gives a much better balanced lower register. You know, the first three notes on a cylindrical instrument are well balanced, whereas a Ganassi type instrument will honk on the low G, will have a fairly soft A and a louder B. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you. And I suppose my next question would be, how long is your waiting list?
Well, it's about a year. Perhaps I'm not a very quick maker, and I'm just now I have a lot of research on. I've been asked to make a consort of flageolets, for example, which is something which is just described in two treatises, Mersenne and Pierre Trichet. I've made the first of these, but I have two more at least. Trichet Trichet mentions a soprano instrument in C and Mersenne a soprano in D. So I haven't yet decided which of the two to make, but the bass one is in C. So this is my present project. And then of course I have this Cerisi instrument also, which puzzles me a little because of its strange shape. And I sort of try to fit these research periods into my making. It is important to do research to try and sort of make things go forward.
Just to bring Paul in, because you've got an alto in G there, a medieval alto in G there by Philippe, haven't you?
Yes.
Yes.
We were just talking about.
One that we prepared earlier.
I'll just take the spotlight off Philippe for a moment and see if maybe just because somebody was asking about the medieval in G there, Paul. So
yeah,
to show.
Yeah, I just mentioned that I'm not going through my audio interface. I'm just going through my speaker on my computer. So it might not be the best sound for music, but let's see what happens. Like Philippe was saying, you can hear how strong the lower notes on the recorder are. Once you get used to it, I mean, if you're not a recorder player, you'll struggle at first because you're not used to the pressure. But when you get used to it,
somebody did ask as well about your range of medieval recorders there, Philippe. They said, was there a sopranino they saw?
There is, yeah. Yes. This is something I would never have done if I hadn't been asked for it. Mm-hmm. I had a customer and a friend who is in a medieval ensemble, and he wanted a high-pitched instrument. And if you probably saw a picture of it, and the holes are offset because I have such big fingers. I couldn't play it otherwise.
Well, as long as it works.
This is the smallest one. Then I have a descanto or a soprano in C, alto in G, alto in F, and a tenor. Mm-hmm. And then I have this double instrument, this double recorder too, which I love.
Yeah, the double.
I say it's not very, very authentic. Most of the paintings, in fact, you can't really tell if it's one instrument or two.
Yeah, it's really, I don't think I've actually found a single image where you can definitely tell that there's a connection.
No, you can't. No. But it is so much more practical.
Oh gosh, yes, yeah. All of our double recorders have of a what would you call it, a common stock at the top.
Yes,
you know.
and what is possible on that sort of instrument is to have one right-hand instrument and one left-hand instrument, and this does give you more possibilities. If you have all the holes on both, then you can only play using the top holes.
Mm-hmm.
It gives lots of musical possibilities.
Yes.
Even though it's also very limited because you can't. It's not very easy to play. The two instruments together do have a range of an octave and a sixth, but it's sometimes a little difficult to exploit everything.
Thank you so much, Philippe.
It's a
Absolutely
pleasure.
wonderful to see you.
À bientôt. Au revoir.
À bientôt.